That is one big pile of shit. This could be it. We may be in some multiverse where I don't even exist.
Don't knock rationalization. Where would we be without it?
Yes, without the use. To take them out, take them down, do your stuff. Life, finds a way.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of The Complete Works, a deep dive into the career and films of actor Jeff Goldblum. My name is Mike Smith, and joining me on this journey into the wondrous world of Goldblum is my friend, co-host, and fellow Goldblum maniac,
Mike DeCriscio.
How you doing today, Mike?
I am doing great. I'm washing my hands for 20 seconds. I'm working from home, social distancing. We're living the dream here.
Yeah, are your hands as dry and cracked as mine are at this point?
Constantly.
Okay.
I don't understand.
I had to buy. I'm surprised that like Vaseline and moisturizer has not been sold out as much as like toilet paper has, because that was like my first thing when I went to Walmart a couple days ago.
Yeah,
I needed the moisturizer. It had to be there. Like I could not believe washing your hands that much caused your hands to dry out. It makes no sense. You're putting water on them. Why are they drying? Anyway, as you might expect, it's a different situation on the podcast than it was a couple weeks ago. So quick announcement before we actually begin this episode. On our last Mike and Mike Go to the Movies, which we recorded just 7 days ago, we discussed the future of that podcast in the wake of the coronavirus and whether it might have to go on hiatus for a while. It looks like that decision was made for us, right, Mike?
Yeah. Theaters shut down. The movies got pulled or moved 6 months or a year. So I guess we're just going to do Goldblum for the rest of the year.
Yes, so almost every major studio release over the next few months has been delayed, and movie theaters across the country shut down, and it's been really insane to watch. It's a really unprecedented situation that we're looking at in the nation right now, which is wild. And it's hard to do a podcast called Mike and Mike Go to the Movies when you can't actually go to the movies. So since we can't do Mike and Mike for a while, like you said, Mike, that means we're doing this podcast weekly until we finally get back to doing Mike and Mike on a full schedule. So that means we'll be speeding through the early years of Jeff Goldblum's career and maybe pumping out the occasional bonus Mike and Mike, probably starting next week, of what we've been watching while we're stuck inside the house. Have you watched anything since the quarantine really hit, Mike?
No, not a whole lot. I haven't really had a whole lot of time. I had some stuff to take care of. I got set up to work from home. So now that things are calming down and like I have like the routine, I'll be able to go back. Spend some time watching a lot of movies. So. Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I really started getting into the social distancing thing this past weekend. Friday night I was at the movies. I went to the Roxy Theater, which is the indie theater near my house in Missoula, Montana. And the reason I went is because they had said that they were going to do like the 50% capacity thing, try to increase social distancing and all that stuff. They had a really good Facebook post about it. And then like 2 days later, they shut down, which was really upsetting. The Roxy is like basically my second house here in Missoula, so I was upset to hear that. But they're going to be closed until at least April. And so this past weekend, Saturday, I didn't do anything except like I had not left my house in 2 days other than for work. And Saturday, I just spent the entire day in my pajamas watching movies. Gotta say, good day. Had a good time. Like if this is what quarantine will be, I feel like I'm going to handle it better than most.
You'll be fine.
Yeah, it's basically what I was doing already, just more so. But anyway, so back to our Goldblum podcast. We're going through the early years of Jeff Goldblum's career right now, and this time around, after having a sort of breakthrough in the business, having appeared in 2 Robert Altman films, we enter 1976 with a trio of movies where Goldblum again plays small supporting roles, and the first of those movies was Paul Mazursky's Next Stop, Greenwich Village.
In 1953, Larry Lipinski left his home in Brooklyn. His mother thought it was the end of the world. But he knew it was only the beginning.
Larry, where are you going with all that luggage?
Greenwich Village.
What's in Greenwich Village?
Fame and fortune.
20th Century Fox presents Paul Mazursky's Next Stop, Greenwich Village.
You call this an apartment? I don't call this an apartment.
Oh, you call this an apartment? I don't call this an apartment. Got a toilet? I'm dying.
It was a world of bars and coffee houses, artists, actors.
Not only do I think I could do a great job in this picture, but I am also starving and I could really use the work.
And intellectuals.
What do you think of Dylan Thomas?
It's a great outfielder.
I think about suicide once or twice a day.
Suicide makes you feel talented.
I always wanted to be a star.
I want to tell you about the Napoleonic Code, Blanche.
Next stop, Greenwich Village.
It was the perfect place to lose your innocence
Sex is serious. Sex is the most serious thing in the whole world.
I'm pregnant.
and find yourself.
I'm a grown man. I'm not a little boy anymore. I have an apartment. I have a career. I have a life.
For some people, it was the first stop.
Crazy! Who are you?
I'm Bernstein.
You're Jewish?
No, darling, I'm gay.
For others, it was the last.
I don't want to live. I don't want to.
What can I tell you? People get hurt.
Greenwich Village! Greenwich Village!
Paul Mazursky's Next Stop, Greenwich Village. One way or another, we've all been there.
Let's make love.
I love you, Sarah.
I know.
I'll always love you.
No, you won't.
All right, now Paul Mazursky was a filmmaker, probably best known for his directorial debut, 1969's Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, which has recently seen a small resurgence as Quentin Tarantino has cited as an influence on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That's one of the big movies he was talking about in relation to that movie. Especially, we listen to Pure Cinema Podcast a lot. They brought that movie up constantly, especially in the episode with Tarantino was a guest star on.
Yeah.
Mazursky was a critically acclaimed writer-director for much of his career, earned a few Oscar nominations for his screenplays, and won a Best Picture nomination for 1978's An Unmarried Woman. But before he was a filmmaker, Paul Mazursky was an actor, and he made his acting debut with a small role in 1953's Fear and Desire, the very first film from director Stanley Kubrick.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And he's made cameos in his own movies a lot, including this one, actually, and popped up in stuff like Blackboard Jungle, A Star is Born from 1976, and History of the World Part 1, where he plays a Roman soldier. So there is that also. But in the mid-70s, he reflected back on this youth and wrote a semi-autobiographical version of his life to make into his next feature film, and that's what became Next Stop, Greenwich Village. Now, one thing to note about this movie, Mike, is that the lead actor is Lenny Baker, a young actor who was sort of on the rise in the mid-70s. He won a Tony for his performance in a Broadway show and was nominated for a Golden Globe for this movie. But in 1978, just 2 years after this movie came out, he developed a serious illness, possibly HIV-related, but there's no reports that really know for sure, and died in 1982. So Next Stop, Greenwich Village would end up being his final film appearance and his only leading role.
Wow.
So sort of a footnote in 1970s cinema history there. But obviously, we're talking about Jeff Goldblum here, who pops up for 2 scenes in the back half of this movie as Clyde Baxter, a fellow actor auditioning for the same part as Larry. And Lenny Baker is the guy who plays Larry Lipinski, a Jewish kid from Brooklyn who moves to Greenwich Village in 1953 to try to make it as an actor. His mother, Faye Lipinski, is played by Shelley Winters, known for The Diary of Anne Frank, A Place in the Sun, and The Poseidon Adventure. And I was curious if you would recognize his father, Mike, just throwing this out there. You might when I say who it is, but his father, Ben Lipinski, is played by Mike Kellen, who played Mel in Sleepaway Camp.
Wow. Holy shit. Incredible.
There you go.
That's amazing.
Yes. Sleepaway Camp, wild movie, in case anybody hasn't seen it. It's crazy. Now, Larry has a large group of friends in the movie living in the city that he hangs out with, and that includes his girlfriend, Sarah, who's played by Ellen Greene from Little Shop of Horrors. She played Audrey in that movie, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. This is her film debut, and she's like, I only really knew her from Little Shop of Horrors. I guess I'd seen her in a few other things, but like that's like a movie that I latched onto when I was a kid, and I love it so much. I just rewatched it recently. It's still great. This movie is like, it's a completely different character from what she does in Little Shop of Horrors, and it's like she's almost unrecognizable. It's wild. Then there's Anita, a girl with suicidal thoughts, played by Lois Smith, known for Fatal Attraction, Minority Report, and who was the old lady who hires Ryan Gosling in The Nice Guys.
What?
So
now
that too.
Is a connection that I'm looking for, Mike.
There you go. She's also the nun from Lady Bird. I guess she's had kind of a resurgence lately.
Look at that.
And then there's Connie, played by Dory Brenner, who had a recurring role in Who's the Boss back in the day. There's Bernstein, a gay black man, played by Antonio Fargas, a.k.a. Huggy Bear from Starsky and Hutch.
Holy shit.
Yeah, there you go. And finally, there's Robert, a womanizing poet intellectual, played by Christopher Walken, in a very early role for him. So very cool to see very young Christopher Walken. This is like pre-Deer Hunter, pre-Annie Hall Christopher Walken. And then from there, Lou Jacoby from movies like Anne Frank, Arthur, and Amazon Women on the Moon plays Herb, Larry's boss at the restaurant. Joe Spinell from The Godfather and Rocky. He's the guy who Rocky is owes money to in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
He plays the cop at the train station that kind of interrupts Larry while he's monologuing. Vincent Schiavelli from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Fast Times at Ridgemont High can be seen at the rent party. I don't think he has any lines, but as soon as I saw him, he was like, "That's Mr. Vargas from Fast Times."
That's the guy.
And finally, in his very first film appearance, Bill Murray shows up for a blink and you'll miss it part as Nick Kessler. He pops up at the bar in the beginning, and then you can see him in the background at the rent party too. Did you catch Bill Murray when you were watching this movie, Mike?
I must have blinked because I definitely did not catch it.
It's within the first few minutes of the movie. We'll talk about it in a bit, I guess. But yeah, Bill Murray pops up literally for seconds in this movie.
Wow.
But as soon as I saw him, I was like, "Holy shit!" It's literally like if you don't know he's there, you will miss him.
Yeah.
So Next Stop Greenwich Village was written and directed by Paul Mazursky 2 years after his previous film Harry and Tonto, and 2 years before his next film, An Unmarried Woman. The film was nominated for the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, got a WGA nomination for Best Original Screenplay. The movie was released on February 4th, 1976, and made a little over $1 million. It looks like it was the only major movie released on that day, although less than a week later, Martin Scorsese would release a little movie that you may have heard of called Taxi Driver, which, kind of a big deal. I mean, they're making Joker movies based on it now. And the IMDb plot synopsis for Next Stop Greenwich Village reads, "The ups and downs of life as experienced by a group of aspiring young artists in the early 50s New York." So Mike, that all out of the way, what are your overall thoughts on Next Stop Greenwich Village?
I kind of really loved this movie. I wasn't really sure what to expect at all going into it. I didn't know anything about it, or had never really heard of it. And it kind of felt like one of those little forgotten film discovery moments. Even though it has this kind of huge cast in all supporting roles, but it feels like one of these movies that just was made by this kind of New York art house film squad in the early 70s, and kind of just put it out, and whatever happened. But yeah, I don't know, I had a really good time with this whole movie, almost the whole movie. By the third act, things take a pretty dark turn, and I'm sure we'll get into them. But yeah, it was just this really frank, slice life of Larry Lipinski, and just what it is to be a struggling actor in 1953 Greenwich Village with the whole Beat Generation and all that stuff going on.
Right.
And that whole vibe was really cool. I don't know, it just I guess that was the whole thing with the Beat Generation, the beatniks. We're all too cool. We're smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, talking about being artistes in the bars. And that's a lot of fun. It was fun to just be with those people. And these characters, all these people were really interesting and feel alive in some weird way. That whole crew, that main crew that they're all the friends that the movie kind of focuses on. I don't know, it just seemed like they'd be fun to hang out with. But I guess it has that kind of classic self-referential thing, because the semi-autobiographical, where it turns out actually we all fucking suck. We're terrible people. So it takes that turn at the end, which I'm sure we'll get into. But for most of the runtime, I was pretty engaged and had a fun time with this movie.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed this movie. It's a really great hangout movie. It's just one of those things where you put it on, it does a really great job of creating a very fun cast of characters. And I really love coming of age movies in general. It's just one of those things where it's movies depicting being in your 20s and trying to figure out who you are. That's just something I latch onto for some reason, who knows why. And it feels like a fairly timeless depiction of that, even though it takes place in 1953, and a cool kind of depiction of the Beat Generation, like you said. And I think it's an awesome movie. I wish it was more readily available to people. I feel like this is a movie that if it could be rediscovered down the line if it's available somewhere. But it's not on any streaming services. It's not. I don't think it has a Blu-ray or anything, or it might have a specialty Blu-ray release, like a Twilight Time, I want to say. Yeah,
Twilight Time put it out, so it is available, but that is a boutique Blu-ray label. You'd have to know to go look for it.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise there's basically no way to actually find it online unless you're going through illegal means. Because I mean, even if I typed it into Just Watch, which is the app that tells you where anything is streaming at any given time. And it didn't even have an entry for Next Stop Greenwich Village. It didn't even have a thing that this movie existed kind of thing.
Wow.
So that was a little difficult, but it did have a Netflix disc. I was able to get it through Netflix, and then when I got it, the disc was cracked. And
What? Like
yeah.
broken, not
Like-
scratched.
Like, yeah, it literally, like, there was like a crack in the disc, and like I could like kind of pull one side of the disc up higher than the other.
What the fuck?
Yeah, so I had to send it back and had to go find the movie online through extra legal means. But yeah, that was I tried to do it through the illegitimate channels, and I couldn't do it in time for the podcast because of Netflix. Blame Netflix for that one.
It's all Netflix's fault.
It's all Netflix's fault. But I really enjoyed the movie. I think one of the things I kind of liked about it, it almost feels like an off-Broadway, like one-man show, sort of.
Yeah.
You remember there was like an SNL sketch like years ago where it was Fred Armisen doing like a one-man show, and he's like, "It sure was crazy living in Greenwich Village, but the characters I met there were even crazier." And that felt like the thing that felt like the thesis of this movie. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking a lot of Oh Hello on Broadway while I was watching this movie.
Yes, exactly. But really enjoyed it. I think Ellen Greene to me is the total standout of the movie. She plays Sarah, his girlfriend. I think she's incredible. I think her character is like just really razor sharp and witty. And again, a complete 180 from Audrey in Little Shop. Which, have you seen Little Shop of Horrors, Mike?
I have, but not to the extent that you have, so I don't really remember her performance as Audrey.
Okay, well, I mean, Audrey is, also a city girl, but she's, it's a very high-pitched voice, and it's the blonde wig and very tight clothes, and, like, it's just it's a very different performance than what she gives here, which is much more down to earth. And I think it's really interesting, because I really only knew her for Little Shop. I had seen her in a couple other things here and there, like, I looked at her Wikipedia page, and I was like, oh, yeah, she was in this movie, and she was in this movie, but, like, I knew her as Audrey, and then when I saw her in this movie, I was like, is that the role that Ellen Greene is playing? And it turns out it was. And she's incredible in this movie. I think she's awesome. So it gave me a greater appreciation for Ellen Greene's talents as an actress, I guess.
Nice.
And it was her first ever movie, which is pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And, it does, I think the movie balances comedy and drama really well. Like you said, it does take some dark turns toward the third act of the movie. But, there's still, like, a lot of light stuff that's happening around it, too. Like, the Jeff Goldblum scenes are in that third act of the movie, too. Which are very funny. The Jeff Goldblum stuff is great. We're going to get to that in a second. But you get the fun and freedom of these people kind of living on their own in New York for the first time, but you also get into the psychology of each character and what hurts or scares them. I think when you said they feel alive, like, it does a really good job of making all these characters who, are part of a big ensemble. All of them have, like, their own inner wants and desires, and, like, they're all their own, like, kind of mental problems they're dealing with.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The screenplay for this is really intense, I guess. But yeah, it was fun to just be able to hang out with these characters in the bar, and then they're having these long discussions about whether or not the word terrible is what you should use to describe the Rosenbergs, right? Is that what their names are?
Right, the Rosenbergs. Yeah,
the husband and wife that were like executed for espionage.
Yeah, that was. I haven't thought about the Rosenbergs in a very, very long time, but based on my recollection of like 11th grade history, yes, that was the thing.
Right. So that's going on, and then we're also playing Subway at the rent party, whatever the fuck that was. But that rent party scene is amazing.
It looked like so much fun. It looked like just like a good time. Like a good party to hang out at.
Definitely violates the quarantine protocol, though. There's more than 10 people there.
This is true. Although they didn't know about it in 1953.
Right, that's right.
There's one guy in the room who's just like, man, that coronavirus, it's coming, guys.
It's coming.
It's a very prescient movie, is what we're saying. But anyway, also every once in a while, the movie kind of breaks into these surrealist acting fantasies, too. That usually involve his mother, which are often very funny. I think also reveal a lot about their relationship. This is a very Jewish movie too. We should say that also. Paul Mazursky, of course, being a Jewish person, a lot of it is about sort of the generation gap between his generation and his parents' generation, and how they're dealing with that, and how the overbearing Jewish mother and that kind of thing. It's all coming into play, and how he relates to his generation as a result of that, and how that kind of screwed him up internally a little bit.
Yeah, his father's always giving him advice, being like, during the Depression, which was like 35 years before this movie takes place or whatever.
Right.
And he's got this guilt hanging over him the whole time, which that tracks, I guess.
All right, so we like the movie. We can establish that. Now let's get to Jeff Goldblum, who is in the movie. For 2 scenes, but I would say it's easily the most substantial role we've seen from him on this podcast.
Absolutely.
The only other real contender, I guess, would be Nashville, because he's in several scenes throughout that movie, but he doesn't actually have any dialogue, so he's just kind of there. And he's great. He's great when he's there, but like he's just kind of there. In this movie, he has 2 relatively long scenes of him kind of riffing a little bit, and I think he is great. I think this is arguably the first, like, quote-unquote Jeff Goldblum performance in full that we've gotten so far.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely agree. He's doing the hand thing. He's kind of stuttering a little bit. He's He's being Goldblum in this movie. Finally, we did it. We made it, Ma. Here we go.
Episode 4.
Fourth episode.
Shut it down now. That's it. But yeah, he's dynamic to watch just because you're not quite sure like what acting choice he's going to go for at any given moment. Like you can tell it's Goldblum, but it's like a young, hungry Goldblum who is like, I feel like what I like about these early roles is he seems so excited to just be on screen.
Yes.
Which, you know, he also has that throughout his career. Like I feel like that never really leaves, but like because he's in his 20s and because I think this reflects, like this movie kind of reflects where he was in his life at the time. He was a young, struggling actor in New York in the mid-70s, and this is just about he's playing a young, struggling actor in New York in the mid-50s in this movie. It's not a stretch for him by any means. But so yeah, in his first scene, Goldblum meets Larry at a casting call, and they talk about their experience. What I also like about this, this might have slipped past you, Mike, because it kind of goes by pretty fast, but Goldblum mentions that he studied for 6 years under Sandy, which is a reference to Goldblum's real-life acting teacher, Sanford Meisner, who I mentioned in the first episode of this podcast. So I think that was like a cool connection to draw, too. That was
I like it.
Yeah, and I think that...
when that came up in the movie, I was like, I wonder if this is the real thing. Because I remember you mentioning it, but I couldn't remember what the names were. So I didn't know if that was where he actually studied. So I'm glad to find out that it was.
Yes, there it is. So I thought that's pretty cool. And I feel like that kind of emphasizes, like, I feel like there was some improvisation going on throughout this movie. And I think the Goldblum scene especially like has some of that. I think the subway scene also is like when they're doing the fake subway thing at the party. That feels like a very like improv heavy scene.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But throughout that Goldblum scene, I mean, he's just like I feel like a lot of the biggest laughs come from those two Goldblum scenes in the movie. And you know, the first time you see Goldblum, he's like yelling at the secretary, being like, I believe I was before them. Was I? You know, all that stuff. And then he meets Larry, and they kind of hit it off right away, and they're like talking for a bit. And then Larry gets called in, and then Goldblum goes back up to the desk and he's like, I believe I was before him. Was I not? Which is pretty great. Unfortunately, I can't find any real clips of Goldblum on YouTube in this movie. Because this movie barely has like any digital footprint. So there are some like YouTube clips here and there of the movie, but like there's a clip of Bill Murray's first appearance and there's some Christopher Walken stuff. But for some reason, there's no Goldblum stuff, which is a shame. He's got
one of my favorite running bits in the whole movie is that he, Larry Lipinski, and he's like, no one's gonna remember that name. You got to change your name. Like Clyde Baxter's not my real name. It's Charlie something, and I forget what it is.
Right, it's like Boflowski or something. Like
yeah. And then Larry keeps forgetting that his name is Clyde and keeps calling him Charlie, which is the name no one's supposed to be able to remember. It's great. I just like it's a little subtle thing. It happens a couple times, and it's just like, mwah, beautiful. Chef's kiss.
Yeah, totally. So that's like his first scene where they kind of hit it off. And then in the second scene, Goldblum is waiting behind Larry to get a screen test for the part. And, you know, Larry has just done a screen test. He sees Clyde or Gary or whatever his name was. And Jeff Goldblum is telling Larry, like, hey, you shouldn't have lied on your screen test tape, because he says something like about the experience that he's had or something on stage or whatever.
He uses Clyde's.
Oh, yeah. And then so Larry like kind of gets pissed at him, and then like, you know, Larry leaves, and then somebody like off screen, which I believe is Paul Mazursky. Paul Mazursky, his cameo in the movie is him as the casting director.
Okay.
Yeah, so Goldblum is like, you know, just annoyed, and he's like kind of talking to himself, and somebody tells him like, hey, be quiet on set. And he's like, be quiet, I am being quiet. What are you talking about? And then they get angry at him. He's like, who are you? He's like, I'm one of the actors screen testing. He's like, well, I think you blew the audition. It's like, all right, and he storms out. So yeah, it was good stuff from Goldblum. Just overall, like this was a really fun Jeff Goldblum performance. Again, only get 2 scenes out of Goldblum, but the 2 scenes you get are really, really good.
Yeah, I think besides Nashville, it's like the most total on screen we've had Goldblum, but most substantial because he talks this time.
Exactly. For sure. So yeah, how do you think this fits into the roles that we've seen Jeff Goldblum play so far, Mike, by the way? Again, there's only 3 roles to compare it to, so don't feel too bad.
I mean, I guess it feels the most akin to California Split because he also talks in this movie.
He has dialogue.
Yes, and it's not freak number 1 crazy murder man like he was in Death Wish. So it's the most normal person character I guess we've had so far.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, like I said, I don't think it really fits in with any of his roles, but it does feel the most like Jeff Goldblum, the person. At that time, especially that young actor in New York, and he's drawn upon that experience to play this role. I also think Nashville did sort of establish some of Goldblum's on-screen mannerisms. There's that scene in Nashville where he's kind of like throwing salt into the air and he's making weird hand gestures.
Yeah.
And it feels like this movie adds dialogue to that and gives it a voice. So,
interesting.
Yes. So it's almost like Goldblum's like career is like, it's much like, I think most actors' career, it's like you kind of start with these really small roles and they build and build over time into bigger and bigger parts. And that's sort of what Jeff Goldblum's getting at right now. So I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the size of his roles are going to be for the next two movies that we're going to talk about, which are Special Delivery, which is the next one with Bo Svensson and Sybil Shepherd, and then Saint Ives, which is another Charles Bronson movie that Jeff Goldblum happens to be another kind of extra criminal in.
I mean, I feel like they all three of these movies came out in the same year, right?
Yeah, all 1976.
Yeah, so I feel like these next couple ones will probably be similar or smaller roles, and then you know once we hit 77, that's it. We're off to the races.
Hopefully.
I have no idea what.
Yeah, I mean, I know 78 is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I have seen, and he's a supporting role in that movie, but it's a significant supporting role. So there is that aspect of it too. So I think in that 2-year span, that's kind of where we start getting the build up to Jeff Goldblum. But yeah, right now 2 scenes in the movie, but he steals the scenes that he's in. So that's good stuff from Goldblum right here. Other than the Goldblum stuff, Mike, any moments or scenes that stood out to you in Next Stop, Greenwich Village?
This movie has this fun thing where it's kind of just like a series of vignettes, right? It's just sort of we're following Larry through these moments in his life. So the big one that stands out to me is the rent party / subway game thing.
Sure.
Which just feels like the most beatnik, like we're all just young college age people living in Greenwich Village in Manhattan, and we're gonna cram 50 people into this two room apartment and just have a giant party, and then mom and dad are gonna come bust it, which is the best worst thing, because then I love that moment when you just see the like absolute like despair on Larry's face, but everyone else at the party is like, yeah, come on, and they like get him drinks, and then Bernstein starts dancing with mom, and like it's just like everyone else is having fun, but it's the worst thing that Larry could ever go through.
Yep. Yeah, which is like how it kind of goes throughout the movie. I feel like they show up at the worst possible time for Larry at any given situation, which is always really funny. But especially during that rent party scene, it's great. When the mom dances with Bernstein, that's such a joyous moment where she's like, Bernstein, you Jewish? And it's like, no, I'm gay. And it's like, I don't care how happy you are, let's dance. Like just completely oblivious to it, which is pretty great. So yeah, really enjoyed that stuff, and that whole rent party scene is really fun. And like we kind of said before, it seemed like a lot of it was improv too. I haven't read the script for this movie, I don't actually know, but it seems like especially when they're doing like the party games and stuff, the subway game, the truth game. I really loved all that stuff.
And it's like I feel like the big Christopher Walken moment too, because he has a big the truth game thing.
Oh yeah, he's the one that suggests playing it. But yeah, and Christopher Walken's so good and so slammy in this movie. He's like,
oh man,
he's great.
What a beautiful piece of shit he is in this movie.
It's fantastic, and you don't even hate him. I feel like in the movie, you just kind of like I feel like you sort of get sucked in like the way Larry does at the beginning, where he's like, this guy's really fascinating, and then by the end you're like, man, this guy's a piece of shit. But yeah, so I mean, there's the opening scene with Larry leaving home, and I think that pretty perfectly captures his dynamic with his parents, like pretty early on, where he's just like arguing with his mom the entire time. And she's like, oh, why is my son leaving? And he's like, you're just trying to make me feel guilty and all that stuff. And he leaves. And then it kind of cuts to, I guess some time has passed, because it immediately cuts to him and Sarah like in bed. So like they've been dating for a while, or a little bit at least, and stuff like that. And he takes her out to the bar, and that's where you see Bill Murray in the bar, by the way. So as soon as they enter the bar, Bill Murray is there on the side with a mustache, wearing a sombrero around his neck. And he says, Buenas noches, senor. And then and then Larry tells Sarah a story about the time that Bill Murray's character tried to go to Mexico, and then got a taco at the airport, and then had like horrible like shits, and then like spent like 2.5 hours in the airport and came back, and that was basically it.
Hi. Buenas noches, senor.
How are you? Good.
Who's that?
It's Nick Kessler. It's a crazy guy. Saved up all his money to go to Mexico. Wanted to see the ruins, get into the primitive thing. So he quit his job and everything, and he took off for Mexico City on Monday. 2 beers, Ray?
Yesterday, Monday?
Right. So he got off the plane, and he ate a taco, and he got a terrible case of the shits. So he took the next plane back. Spent 2.5 hours in Mexico. He says it stinks.
So that was about Bill Murray's character in the bar. Is basically
amazing.
That was Bill Murray there, and then you also see Bill Murray in the background of the rent party, which again, it's a blink and you miss him thing. He's literally like in the background of a couple of shots, and it's there's one shot where you can see him pretty clearly, where there's like kind of a crowd of like 3 people, and Bill Murray's like right behind them, and you can kind of just see like Bill Murray standing there. It's really weird.
That's amazing.
But yeah, so that's the Bill Murray stuff you're going to get in this movie. Maybe we'll cover it again on our Bill Murray podcast next season. But until then...
Time will tell.
Time will tell. I also really love the scene where Larry is walking back from Sarah's and he's doing his Brando impression. That's really great. Because A Streetcar Named Desire would have just been out like for 2 years at that point, so whatever. So he was like obviously perfecting it or whatever. And he's doing like a fake Oscar speech at the subway and stuff like that. And the cop stops him and is like, "Are you supposed to be doing Brando?" It's like, yeah, it's Brando. It's like, your Brando sounds like Edward G. Robinson. Show me your Edward G. Robinson. And it doesn't sound anything like Edward G. Robinson.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I like that whole scene. It's like, what a pleasant interaction with a police officer, you know? Remember when that was a thing?
Back in 1953? I mean...
Yep, for a white guy.
Yeah, I was about to say. But yeah, so I really like that whole sequence. And then again, like you said, it's kind of just like vignettes throughout the movie. Like, you know, the movie will bring up a storyline and it'll be about that for about 15 minutes and then it'll kind of drop it and then move on to something else sort of thing, like a slice of life type deal. But there is a recurring bit about their friend Anita who threatens to commit suicide every week. And they all treat it like a joke, and they go to cheer her up, and it's always pretty funny. Like when they're like doing a conga line down the street, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go save Anita," and that kind of thing. And their reactions to it are funny, and the way they cheer her up is funny. And you know, there's the bit where they're like, "Hey, why don't we go see Limelight in theaters?" And which is a Charlie Chaplin movie, and she's like, "I love Charlie Chaplin," you know. And then towards the end, she actually does it. She kills herself. And the moment where Christopher Walken opens the door and just flatly says, like, she's dead, like, holy shit, man, that was incredible.
Yeah, that was really intense because that's the one when they're doing the cha-cha down the street is that time.
Yes.
So they're like, you know, laughing, they got wine and drinks and they're like, "Oh, we're going to go save Indeed," like doing the whole thing.
Yep.
And then they're still like partying and he just is in the background and he opens the door and finds her. Yeah. And just goddamn.
Yeah,
like abrupt stop, and then we get the Connie, I think, tells the story of how she met Anita, and it's like this whole tragic thing. I don't know, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, just the way, like, again, like you said, Christopher Walken's like in the background and he opens the door, but as soon as he does it, you can see it on his face, like before he says anything, even though everyone else is still partying, and it's like it's a really great acting moment from Christopher Walken. And like, hey, it's Walken, man, he's great. Like honestly, I considered doing a Christopher Walken podcast, but that would take us a million years, so I figured maybe not.
Yeah.
But he's an incredible actor, and I think that's a moment where it's like, oh shit, that's why you get Walken. But yeah, and he's playing the world's best hipster from before hipsters were invented, basically. Like it's
well, yeah, it's what the hipsters think they are.
That's true. Yeah, every hipster is just trying to be Christopher Walken in Next Stop Greenwich Village, basically.
Correct, basically.
But your first real taste of him is, like you mentioned before, he's arguing about the Rosenbergs with Larry and Sarah and trying to figure out the right word for it. I think my favorite Christopher Walken moment in the movie is when he's telling Larry about how he had sex with his sister when he was 9.
Well, yeah.
It's like it's such a grody story, but it's one of those things where it's like this is like a weirdly it's a very funny moment, I think. And he's like, oh, she joined a convent and now she's part of a weird sex group, like with whips and chains, and like again, it's all in Walken's inflection, you know.
Yeah, and he's doing it then, which is hilarious.
Yes.
Like even back in 1976, he's got the whole thing.
Right. That's just the way Christopher Walken talks, and he is running with it for 50 years. It's great.
I left home after my first affair.
How old were you?
9.5.
Who did you have the affair with?
My sister. She was 19, ravishing beauty. She looked like Jean Tierney.
Oh, I love Jean Tierney. She looks like a Chinese empress.
Seriously, my sister.
What happened to her?
She joined a Carmelite order, became a nun.
She's a nun.
She was. 2 years ago, she left the nunnery.
Where's she now?
She's in Paris. She's a member of a bizarre sadomasochistic sexual order. Whips, chains, hot candles, that sort of thing.
Sounds like a fun person.
I took that whole story as them trying to gross out the secretary that they're sitting next to, because they both are like staring at her while they tell this weird, crazy story.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely that's definitely part of it too. But the thing is, throughout the movie, Christopher Walken tells these stories
Right. Okay.
Like,
Yeah, true.
Very similar stories to that one. You know, when they're doing the abortion storyline, it's like, I remember my first abortion. You know, that which is a real line. That's a line he says in the movie. You know.
Yep. Yeah.
And there's like stuff like that, and like it's unclear like how much of this is like a fabricated part of this persona that he's built up, and how much, and you know how much of it is actually real. So I could totally see him just trying to gross out the person. That's totally fine. That's totally like a read on that scene.
Yeah,
but like it's also like I feel like he wants Larry to believe that story also.
I think you're right. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about that, like the facade and the stuff people that you just kind of like, the people that stumble into your lives and they just like will make up a story because you've never met them before.
Right.
It's like an underlying theme throughout this whole movie. But back to the abortion plotline real quick. I was shocked at how like frank and upfront that was in this movie, and it's just like, this is a fact of life and it's a thing that happens.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think my favorite line in the movie comes from that actually, which is when Ellen Green, when it first happens, like Ellen Green goes to where Larry works, and she's like, I gotta talk to you, and she's like, what's going on? She's like, I'm pregnant, and it's like, okay, I gotta take off, and they're in the street, and he's like, oh, well, what are we gonna do? And she says, I don't know about you, but I'm gonna get an abortion. It was great.
Amazing.
It's such a funny line. But I really like just the matter-of-fact way the movie deals with it, and what they have to go through in order to get it. You know, like it's
right.
the 70s, so it's very difficult to do. You know, they have to pretend they're married at the
50s.
hospital. Oh yeah, the 50s. It's even harder to do in the 50s. But they both have to like pretend they're married, so the hospital will take them in and stuff like that, and they have to get like a special pill that'll make her bleed, so they make her think they have to like kind of all this. It's a whole thing. It's a whole process.
Yeah.
In order to do it safely, which is, it's pretty wild. And so I like the way this movie kind of deals with that, and how it doesn't have any like big scenes either about how like, Ellen Green feels about it. Like it allows her to express it a lot more subtly, I think. Because that character just isn't the kind of person that has like big emotional moments, until like the very end of the movie, which even then, like it's fairly restrained, but like throughout the whole storyline, like it's all on her facial expressions about how she's feeling about it and stuff like that. And she's, she's having this baby, but she doesn't want to like it's very clear early on, like she does not want to end up with Larry,
yes,
and Larry views that relationship so differently than she does, where she's like, we're going to get married one day, which is, I think, one of those things that stems from his overbearing Jewish mother, where she's like, this is like the thing that has to happen at some point.
The conversation after the rent party where the mom is there and cleaning up, and she's like, well, tell me everything about, like, wants to know everything, and like, are you, when are you guys gonna get married, or like, are you what does she say? I forget. Does she say make whoopee? I forget what she uses, some like old-fashioned phrase, which is
she
hilarious.
says some kind of old-fashioned thing to try to get them to say it, I guess, because she suspects it, but and Larry's trying to tell Sarah not to say anything. And then, like, after a very uncomfortable silence, Sarah's like, well, yeah, we've had sex. And, like, the reaction...
That was it.
Yeah, the reaction from Larry first was like, thanks. And and then the mom freaks out. Perfect. It was so good.
Yeah.
That whole stuff was great. Again, that was, like, right after the rent party, too. Again, I love Ellen Green in this movie. And Shelley Winters as the mom also, I think, is really, really terrific.
Yeah, that one surrealist acting class dream that he has, where his mom is there, is the scene partner.
Yeah, and he's
hilarious.
He's making out with his mom in the, in the scene.
Yeah, and then she's tap dancing. It's very strange.
There's a decent amount of tap dancing in this movie. Just throwing that out there. There's also that one scene where he's talking to the casting director and the agent or whatever, and the agent's like, "I used to be a tap dancer," and he starts tap dancing up the floor. It's great.
I used to do vaudeville. No. He starts dancing. It's crazy.
The Michigan Frog. Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey.
Yeah.
That's great. More movies should have tap dancing. Is basically the conclusion that we're coming to with this one, I think.
I think you're right.
If there's one takeaway you can take away from this podcast, is that more movies need to have tap dancing. But yeah, then after all that, like, that's the audition scene, and that's the scene with Goldblum in it where he meets them, and then there's the screen test, which is right before Goldblum's second scene. And I thought that was a really interesting, because the idea that Larry is supposed to be like a tough guy, I thought was very funny, because it doesn't seem like that at all throughout the movie,
No.
But they're just like, oh, well, you grew up on the streets of Brooklyn, you're a tough guy, and like they kind of just throw him in there, and he has like a leather jacket, and he's kind of putting on like I'm trying to think of like what actor he's like kind of. It sort of seems like he's doing the Fonz, like when he's doing the
yeah,
when he's doing the screen test voice. He's like, hey, yeah, I'm from Brooklyn, and you know, all that stuff.
Yeah, I like that he hands it up like when he talks to the very first scene with the casting director guy, and he tells him like what part of Brooklyn he grew up in, and he's like, oh, Murder Incorporated, huh? Like, wow, crazy.
Yeah.
And then he steals that, he uses that in the screen test, and then also steals Clyde's acting prestige, or his history.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really interesting, like, revealing scene about Larry, that he's willing to like just flat out lie to get this acting job.
Pretty much, and that's what tanks Goldblum's chances as an actor too.
Exactly.
In the movie. That's a shame. And then other stuff kind of scattered throughout the movie. I mean, I also like we mentioned, there's always every character has at least like one big kind of scene. And I think the scene where Bernstein is just under the covers, not wanting to engage in the outside world, is really, really great. He's kind of telling about how he's living a lie, how his name isn't actually Bernstein. The only part of him that's real is the fact that he's gay and black, and the world hates that, and stuff like that. That's it's really powerful stuff, and I think especially because in 1953, it feels it resonates.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what I was referencing with the whole like the facade that people put up about themselves is kind of this underlying theme throughout the movie. And yeah, that scene's really intense. And I appreciate that scene with Larry, or Larry in that scene when he kind of is like, doing this bit to make his friend feel better kind of thing. And he's talking about like, well, going number one, that's a staple. Number two, hilarious. And he's going through like all the like, fart jokes that would make anybody laugh kind of thing.
Right.
It's like really endearing.
Absolutely. And that also reflects back to the acting class that he took before, where the acting teacher is telling him like, you joke to avoid the truth and that kind of thing. Like you're avoiding any kind of emotional emotional attachment because you're like just deflecting it with jokes. And that is something that he has to work on in real life too. So that's a perfect example of that. But and then kind of shortly after that is the reveal that Ellen Green's character Sarah, Larry's girlfriend, has slept with Christopher Walken many times with the resulting breakup, which of course his parents walk in on. Which it's a very intense scene when they break up. And there's a scene where Larry hits Sarah and it's not great.
Nope.
But it's just a very emotionally draining scene, and I think Ellen Green is terrific in it. But then the parents walk in, and it becomes kind of funny, where it's just like it's deeply upsetting still. Like, you can see like how broken they are as a result of this breakup. But the parents are like just so incredulous, like, "Oh, what are you doing? You here? What? You sleeping with this girl? You got to get married," and like all that stuff.
Yeah, that whole scene is just the worst. I mean, it's incredible, but it is the absolute worst because they have that big argument. And I love the juxtaposition between Connie and Christopher Walken's character, whose name I forget on the top of my head.
Robert.
They're still in the restaurant, and they're like, after Larry and Sarah leave to have this conversation, before we go to them, they're in the restaurant, and they're like, oh, well, you want to go back to my place, like make love for a few hours? And it's like, well, okay, before you change your mind, let's go. And it's like this, kind of like lighthearted, goofy thing.
Right.
And then we go to Larry and Sarah, and they're having an argument in the street first, and then he's like, let's go make love, like real angrily, and it's like, oh man, that's just the worst. And then she reveals that she slept with Robert, and then he slaps her and then chokes her and then slaps her some more. And then it's this like whole awkward, terrible thing. And then the parents come in, and it's just like, what is happening? Like, this is the worst possible thing over and over and over again.
Yeah. So she storms out after that, Sarah. And I believe that's the last you see of her in the movie.
Yes.
But then you hear later on that she and Robert kind of went to Mexico City together, which, I mean, she had wanted to go to Mexico the entire movie. That was like her entire goal, was to get out of New York and go to Mexico. And so now they've done that. And there's like one good joke towards the end where he's talking to his mom, and he's like, whatever happened to that girl you were dating? And he's like, would you believe she ran off with a lover to Mexico? And he's like, they teach you these jokes in Greenwich Village or something like that. But but by the end, the group has like basically broken up. I mean, Anita has died.
Right.
Sarah and Robert are in Mexico. Larry is going to LA to work on a movie. He got the part. So the only ones left in New York are Bernstein and Connie. And also a nice detail, which I really liked, is that when we leave Connie and formerly Anita's apartment, like they live together, when they see that place for the last time, there's like an out of focus statue of Charlie Chaplin on the counter. Which was a really good callback to early in the movie when she was like, "I love Charlie Chaplin," and another like extra note of heartbreak that the movie kind of goes for. I've talked about this before, but I feel like movies that are generally funny but have a sense of melancholy around them. Those are movies that affect me a lot. Like, that's Wes Anderson movies or Noah Baumbach movies are good examples of those. And this is a good example of that too. I actually, when I was watching this, I feel like this was an influence on Inside Llewyn Davis by the Coen Brothers.
Whoa!
And then I looked it up, and apparently they have name dropped this movie a couple of times, so it would make sense. Much like California Split, it was a influence on Uncut Gems. We're connecting back to current movies with this Goldblum podcast, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And there was also that really heartbreaking moment, in retrospect, at the rent party, I think it is, where we see Anita and she's all excited and she fell in love and she's gonna marry this guy, and he's 6 foot tall and he's a sailor and he had to go to I forget wherever. So he had to sail off to some faraway place for the month or something. And she's like, oh, when he comes back, we're going to get married. And then it's a joke that, Bernstein's like, oh man, I found this 6 foot sailor and he's blonde and he's beautiful and I love him. And it's like, oh man, that's funny. That they kind of, two sides of the same thing or whatever.
Yeah.
But then Anita's thing where she's saying Ken, he's not an intellectual and he's not a painter and he's not a poet and he's just a regular dude. And she wants out of this Beat generation so bad.
Yeah.
And then she dies over it, I guess is where I'm going with that. But at the time it's played like a joke, oh man, they both love the same person,
right?
Kind of thing, and then it's oh wait, fuck dude.
Yep, there it is. So yeah, they all kind of break up, and then the movie kind of ends with Larry back in his parents' apartment and telling them hey, I'm going out to LA and all that stuff. I also really like his relationship with his dad in the movie. It's a very kind of aloof thing, sort of, but it feels very true to life, where the dad's just making awkward small talk throughout the movie with his son, where she's oh, how many engines does the plane have? 4.
Yeah.
That's a safe number. That's a good number.
Yeah, and the mom is even where'd you hear that? What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that felt if you're not sure what toxic masculinity is, take a look at this movie and see the relationship between Larry and his dad in this movie, and how just completely stifled and smothered their relationship has to be,
right?
Quote unquote.
So there's that sequence where he's kind of saying goodbye to his parents. His dad kind of says that, and his mom saying goodbye. I think his mom's final line, I don't know if it's her final line, but the final sentiment, where she's if you ever meet Clark Gable in Hollywood, tell him I always loved him and saw all of his pictures. I thought that was a great note to end her character on. That was just a perfect she's so. She was so against her son being an actor, but it feels like she's come around and being hey, by the way, if you ever meet Clark Gable, tell him I love him. That was great. It was a good note to kind of end their relationship on.
Yeah, and the way that when he moves out, it's actually I think later when they visit him for the first time in Greenwich Village, where she's yeah, when you don't call me, when you're gonna call me at 4:00 every, you don't write to me, what are you gonna do? And here at the end, when he's leaving for LA, he's I'll write to you every day and I'll call you every other day at 4:00. And they've developed an actual relationship now.
Yeah.
Which is pretty nice.
Yeah. Pretty great. All right. So we've kind of gone through the beginning of the movie through the end. Is there any other scenes throughout the movie, Mike, that you kind of want to quickly bring up before we move on to Letterboxd reviews?
There's not really a specific scene, but there's this kind of feeling that sort of happens at the end of this movie, especially at I think the very end, when he's on the street and he's watching the kids, play ball, and then the guy's playing the fiddle, and he's kind of realizing this is his home, kind of thing.
Yep.
But I thought of the thing of the running joke in Oh Hello, that that they always kind of end on this totally mundane line of dialogue that sort of all of a sudden is supposed to have meaning, even though this final shot has meaning in the movie.
Sure.
But just kind of
Yeah, I know. Yeah, waiter, I'll have 2 root beers, please, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Fade to black.
Fade to black.
Back to that off-Broadway thing. I'm telling you, it feels like it's structured like one of those kind of shows.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the movie begins and ends in the same shot too. It has the same shot of that same building in Brooklyn. It's the same shot in both places, and it's even the same thing where the beginning of the movie, that old lady, old neighbor lady, asks Larry, "Where you going with all that luggage?" Greenwich Village, and it's well, what's in Greenwich Village, and all that stuff. And then at the very end of this movie, it's "Where you going with all that luggage?" Los Angeles, and all that, all that. So yeah, it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Came full circle in a way, but you had to leave to go back in order for it to all make sense.
How about that?
Yeah. All right. So next out, Greenwich Village, kind of a hidden gem from the 70s that we hadn't seen before, and we both really liked it. It's really good.
Yeah, I might have to take a peek at that Twilight Time Blu-ray, you know? That might be a thing.
Next Blu-ray sale, that's the one.
There it is.
All right, so let's move on to Letterboxd reviews for Next Up Greenwich Village. I got a 4-star review here from Entered the Void, which reads, "An hour and 50 minutes ago, I had no idea this film existed. I remember it well. It was a horrible time to be alive. Also, have the Coen brothers seen this? Question mark. Which is fair. Here's a 3.5-star from An Observer, which reads, "In a weird way, this sort of reminded me of a 1950s version of Girls, except for the guy is the main character."
Wow.
Which is relatively accurate. Did you ever watch Girls on HBO, Mike? I was a big fan of that show.
I didn't watch like the whole series, but I watched some of it, and then I just never like followed through.
Okay. But yeah, it is a very similar thing. It's about a young group of friends in their 20s in New York, kind of trying to figure it out. It's the proto Girls in a weird way. So there is that.
How about that?
Matthew Price came in with a no-star rating, but it just said, "Man, just perfect. If there was a great character actor within 300 miles of New York City in 1975, they are in this somewhere." Don't check IMDb, don't spoil it, just watch and keep being astounded by who shows up.
Yeah.
Which is fair. Again, I mean, supporting role for Christopher Walken, you got Jeff Goldblum in here, Bill Murray popping up for 2 seconds, and a couple of other kind of smaller people in there too. Here's a 3.5-star review from Evan Leakus, which reads, "I came here for a look at a group of beatniks and subterraneans erring through life in the 1950s. That's what I get most of the time until the film gets its own way with strange, Woody Allen-esque surrealist sequences. Besides that, I loved a lot of what this film had to offer. This is such a great look at the group of people, and I'm glad to have watched this. I will continue to search for more beat films because I found it strange that most of this time period was devoted to literature. Still, I march on and will continue my search for purpose in these people who were gone long before I was born. The Anita scenes were easily the best, and I absolutely love the rest of the group's reactions to her continued suicide attempts." Which is such a weird thing to say. But it's true. Those are very fun sequences.
What an awful way to phrase that.
Yes.
But I admire the sentiment.
Exactly. I found one more as a 4-star review from Hank, which reads, "I want to hang out with these people. I think I may have hung out with these people." Is there higher praise for a movie like this than that? And that's fair. This is a great hangout movie. Is basically kind of my conclusion to it. It's just a great group of characters, good to hang out with. It's a good movie to vibe to. And I feel like it's one that, I think you're right. I feel like the Twilight Time Blu-ray might have to be a purchase for me at some point. I feel like I'm going to want to rewatch this movie, and I'm not going to want to, find an illegal stream of it somewhere to get a hold of it this time around. But yeah, that is Next Up Greenwich Village. Mike, any final thoughts on the movie before we wrap this up?
What a fun little discovery we had here today.
Yeah, we're 2 for 2 in discoveries so far between the California Split and this movie.
Yeah. I'm hoping the next one. What is it? Special Delivery seems
Special
pretty
Delivery, yes.
Interesting.
Which I believe played at the New Beverly not too long ago. So there is some interest there. So there is that aspect of it, at least. I mean, they play some bad movies too, but you never know. You never know. I think it'll be a fun time. But that's also one that's really not easily available anywhere. I might have to go with the online stream for that one too, which is unfortunate. But yeah, there's no real streaming services. I believe there is some kind of Blu-ray for it, like from a specialty label, right? I think you might.
Yes, there is a Kino Lorber Blu-ray of it.
Okay, so Kino Lorber has a Blu-ray special delivery, but obviously I probably won't be able to get that in time before we review the next episode. So
next week.
It's a weekly podcast now, Mike.
My God,
what are we gonna do other than review Goldblum movies? That's what we're doing. Next Up Greenwich Village. It's great. I would recommend picking up the Twilight Time Blu-ray or watching it if you have any means to do so. If you can. And that's going to be it for this week. Mike, where can we find you online this week?
You can find me at MD Film Blog on Twitter and Letterboxd.
And you can find me at M Smith Film Blog on Twitter, Mike Smith Film on Letterboxd, and Radio Mike Sandwich on Instagram. Thank you for listening to The Complete Works. I'm Mike Smith. That's Mike DeCriscio. Don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast app. We're on Spotify now, too. You can check that out. And if you want to contact us, hit us up at jeffgoldblumcompleteworks@gmail.com. And you can find the rest of our podcasts on Rapture Press alongside the Review Zoo, which is a podcast about comic books and movie news and all that nerdy stuff. And you can follow this podcast on Twitter at GoldblumPod. Our theme song was created by Kyle Cullen. Our logo was designed by Jacob Honeycutt or at Jacob Honey on Twitter. And you can join us next week on The Complete Works, where we're talking Goldblum's role in 1976's Special Delivery, which is a neo-noir comedy crime film starring Bo Svensson and Sybil Shepherd. So that should be fun. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
That sounds... I wonder if the Coen brothers have seen that one also.
Maybe these are all maybe the Coen brothers were just huge students of Jeff Goldblum back in the day.
Just specifically 1976 Goldblum.
Yeah, which would be weird because he's never been in any one of their movies, but still.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, anyway, hopefully we'll be able to put a bonus ep of Mike and Mike Go to the Movies out pretty soon too, probably sometime next week. So thanks so much for listening, guys, and remember to go for the Goldblum.